Welcome back, free spirits. If you're new here, this is a place where we explore unconventional choices, bold life pivots, and the people who decide not to follow the path that society expects them to follow. Most episodes feature guests who have made big changes in their lives, people who left careers, challenged norms, or followed a calling that others didn't understand. People who looked at the standard script and thought, maybe there's another way to live. But today, it's just me because there's something I've noticed again and again when talking to guests, talking to listeners, and honestly, when reflecting on my own life. And it's this question: why do people stay stuck even when they know something isn't right? Why do we stay in jobs that drain us? Why do we stay in lifestyles that don't feel aligned? Why do we keep following paths that we know aren't ours? This is something I've been thinking about a lot lately, not just in the context of my own life, but also through the lens of hundreds of conversations that I've had on the podcast. Because when you talk to people who have made unconventional choices, people who have walked away from something that once defined their lives, you start to see patterns. And one of the biggest patterns is this: almost every person who eventually changed their life had a long period before that where they knew something wasn't right. They felt it, sometimes for years, but they stayed anyway. And that realization is really interesting because it means the problem isn't that people don't notice when something is wrong. Most people do. The real question is why it's so hard to act on that awareness. Why do we stay stuck even though when we know something different? And I think a lot of people assume that the answer is simple. They assume it's about laziness or lack of discipline or fear of hard work. But in my experience, that's almost never the reason. In fact, many people who feel stuck are some of the most hardworking, responsible, and thoughtful people you'll meet. They're the people who did everything they were told that they were supposed to do. They followed the rules, they worked hard, they built careers, they created stability. And yet somewhere along the way, something started to feel off. Many people experience a moment when something inside made them shift. Sometimes it's happened slowly, sometimes it happens all at once. Maybe you're sitting at your desk at work and you suddenly realize you feel completely disconnected from what you're doing. I've certainly had jobs where I would drive to work or walk to work and then stand outside for 10 minutes because I just didn't want to go inside. Maybe you're driving home from work one day and you think, is this really what the rest of my life is going to look like? Or maybe you look around at the life you've built and think, this is what I worked so hard for, so why does it not feel right? Sometimes this moment comes when you see someone else living differently. You hear about someone who left a career to pursue something meaningful to them, or someone who built a completely different lifestyle. And suddenly something inside you wakes up. You think, wait a second, that's an option? And once that thought enters your mind, something interesting happens. The script starts to crack. The automatic path that once felt unquestionable now starts to feel like one choice among many. And once you see it that way, it can be hard to go back to not seeing it. But here's where things get complicated. Awareness does not automatically lead to change. Just because someone realizes they want something different does not mean they'll pursue it. In fact, many people don't. They stay exactly where they are. One reason people stay stuck is surprisingly simple. The known feels safer than the unknown. Even if the known isn't great, even if the known is exhausting and deeply unfulfilling, at least it's familiar. Human beings are wired to prefer certainty. Our brains like patterns. Our brains like predictability. Our brains want to know what tomorrow will look like. So when you consider stepping away from a path that you've spent years following, your brain starts to panic a little. It starts asking questions. What if it doesn't work? What if I fail? What if I regret it? What if I lose stability? What if people think I'm irresponsible? Those questions can feel overwhelming. And because they feel overwhelming, many people decide it's easier not to ask them at all. They tell themselves things like, maybe I'm just going through a phase, or maybe I just need to be a bit more grateful, or maybe everyone feels this way. And sometimes those thoughts quiet the discomfort for a while, but the underlying feeling usually doesn't disappear. Another reason people stay stuck is something we don't talk about enough: expectations. From family, from society, from culture. Many of us grew up with very specific script for what life is supposed to look like. Go to school, get good grades, choose a career, work hard, be responsible, build a stable life. And again, there's nothing inherently wrong with those things. But the problem is that the script is often presented as the only path, not one option, the option. So when someone starts to question it, and the pressure can feel intense, because suddenly you're not just making a personal decision, you're challenging expectations that may have been reinforced your entire life. And sometimes those expectations come from people who love you, parents who want you to be secure, friends who worry about you taking risks, colleagues who can't imagine stepping off the path they're on. And sometimes those expectations become internalized. We start to believe we should want the life we've built, even when something inside us quietly says otherwise. For many people, one of the biggest barriers to change is the fear of disappointing others. When you change direction in life, it can create waves. Many people don't understand your decision. People may not, people may question it. They may worry about what it means, and sometimes their concern comes from a place of care, but it can still create pressure because suddenly your decision feels more like more than just your own. It feels like something that might affect everyone around you. And many people choose to avoid that discomfort. They choose the path that feels easier socially, even if it's harder personally. There's another psychological factor that keeps people stuck, and it's something called the sunk cost fallacy. The idea is simple. The more time, effort, or money we invest in something, the harder it becomes to walk away, even if walking away would actually be the healthier choice. Think about someone who spent 10 years building a career, or someone who went through years of education for a specific profession, or someone who built their identity around being successful in a certain field. At some point, stepping away can feel like admitting those years were wasted. But the truth is, those years were not wasted. They were part of your journey. They gave you skills, they gave you insight, and they helped you discover what does and does not feel aligned with who you are. But when we're inside the moment, it can be hard to see it that way. Instead, we think, I've already come this far, I can't turn back now. And that thought can keep people stuck for years, sometimes decades. Another reason people stay stuck has to do with identity. Over time, we build stories about who we are. I'm the responsible one. I'm the practical one. I'm the successful one. I'm the person who follows the rules. Those identities can become deeply ingrained. And when you consider challenging or changing direction, it can feel like you're not just changing your life. You're changing who you are. And that can be unsettling. Because identity gives us stability. It tells us how we behave, how to make decisions, how to show up in the world. But sometimes the identity we built in one chapter of life doesn't fit in the next chapter. And letting go of that identity can be one of the hardest parts of change. There's one more reason people stay stuck that I find particularly interesting. Many people believe that everyone else has their life figured out. They look around and see people who seem confident, successful, and certain about their path. And they assume those people must know something they don't. So instead of questioning the system, they question themselves. Maybe I'm the problem. Maybe I'm just not grateful enough. Maybe I should keep going. But the truth is, many people are quietly questioning their lives. They just don't talk about it. And that silence can make people feel very alone in their uncertainty. One of the reasons I love doing this podcast is because it breaks that illusion. When you When you hear people talk honestly about their journeys, you realize something important. Most people did not have everything figured out. They didn't wake up one morning with a perfect roadmap. They followed curiosity. They followed instincts. Sometimes they followed a moment that forced them to rethink everything. And that's actually how many meaningful life changes happen. Not through perfect planning, not through small moments of courage, not through perfect planning, but through small moments of courage, a question, a realization, a willingness to explore something new. If people stay stuck for all those reasons, how does anyone even break free from that pattern? Well, in my experience, it usually starts with something small. A question, a moment of curiosity, a quiet voice that says, what if there's another way? That voice doesn't always show up loudly. Sometimes it's just a feeling or a sense that something isn't aligned. And the first step is simply allowing yourself to acknowledge it. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to make a dramatic change overnight. But giving yourself permission to question the path you're on can be incredibly powerful. Because once you start asking those questions, new possibilities begin to appear. One thing I've noticed from talking to so many people who have changed their lives is that big transformation rarely happens all at once. They happen through small steps, small experiments, small moments of courage. Someone takes a class, starts a side project, has a conversation they've been avoiding, tries something new, explores an idea they've been curious about for years. And slowly, those small steps begin to create momentum. Eventually, the path that once felt impossible starts to feel real. Not easy, but possible. And possibility is a powerful thing. If you're listening today and you've been feeling stuck, I want you to know something. There's nothing wrong with you. Feeling uncertain, feeling restless, feeling like the path you're on might not be the right one, those feelings are incredibly human. They don't mean that you failed. They don't mean you're ungrateful. They simply mean you're paying attention. And sometimes paying attention is the first step toward living a more authentic life. So I'll leave you with a question today. If there were no expectations, no pressure, and no fear of judgment, what would your life actually look like? You don't have to answer this today, but it might be worth thinking about. Thank you for spending time with me today.